Becoming Beauvoir a Life by Kate Kirkpatrick. First, growing like a girl. At 4:03 a.m. on the morning of the 9th of January 1908, Simone Lucie Ernestine Marie Bertrand de Beauvoir was born into the 6th arrondissement of Paris, and stifling social conventions. The first air she breathed came through second-story windows overlooking the Boulevard Raspail, and by the age of 4 she had mastered the art of extracting her engraved calling cards from the velvet bag she carried when making visits with her mother. Beauvoir would live in the same chic zone of Paris for nearly all of her life. But at the time of her birth the family's fortunes were waning. The Bertrand de Beauvoirs were high bourgeoisie, originally from Bourgogne. One of their ancestors was given an aristocratic title in 1786 only to lose his head, after the Revolution, in 1790. Despite occurring over a century before her birth, this incident has divided biographers of Beauvoir, who diverge in their estimation of her family's social standing. There makes a great deal of Beauvoir's pedigree, but Simone's sister H.L. assigned it much less importance. After the decapitation of their esteemed ancestor, the family did not make much of their aristocratic pretensions. They did, however, still own land with a ch. in Limousin. But Simone's father, Georges de Beauvoir, was not firstborn, so would not inherit it. He was intellectually gifted and charming, but his aspirations did not align with his parents. He wanted to be an actor. His father encouraged him to pursue a more respectable profession, and propriety prevailed. Georges studied law and worked in the office of a well-known Parisian lawyer. He was not ambitious. Neither his father nor his brother needed to work to earn a living, and although his mother had attempted to instill the value of work in him, it never took root. He did want to be married, however, so eventually he left his secretarial role to practice law in his own right, in the hope that it might improve his prospects. Through the brokerage of his father, a suitable contender was found. Françoise Brasseur, a young woman from a northern family with a sizable dowry. Although their name did not have an aristocratic particle like the Dean Bertrand de Beauvoir, the Brasseurs were much wealthier than the Bertrand de Beauvoirs. Gustave Brasseur, the father of the bride, was a very successful Verdun banker. Françoise was his firstborn, but least loved child. Her birth had disappointed his hopes for an heir. She was educated in a convent, and her parents took little interest in her until they encountered financial challenges, which reminded them that she was well into marriageable age. This wasn't the only time that the Brasseurs would exhibit disappointment at a female birth after encountering it as a daughter. Françoise faced it as a mother, and throughout her life she suffered from her parents' coldness. When the two families met for the first time in 1905, it was on the neutral terrain of a Holgate resort in Normandy. Françoise was unenthusiastic about the meeting, but she was also nervous on account of the artificial ritual that was expected of her. According to custom, her suitor's first sight of her was carefully prearranged. In the hotel, she was surrounded by her classmates from the convent in a scenario that displayed her beauty and social bearing, so that he could assess the aptitude of his potential companion as she presided over conversation and tea. Within a few weeks of meeting, Georges proposed. And although the marriage was arranged, by the time of their wedding on the 26th of December 1906, they were also united by love. In its early years, Simone remembered her parents' relationship as a passionate one, emotionally and physically. Just after their first anniversary, Simone was born. Although happy, her 21-year-old mother and 31-year-old father were still negotiating the combination of their lives and the competition of their expectations. Their address, 103 Boulevard du Montparnasse, reflected Georges' status, but its furnishings did not. Georges wanted to recreate the splendor of his father's house. Françoise was young, provincial, and bewildered by the society in which she found herself. Despite their differences, or perhaps because circumstances let them lay dormant, for a few blissful months the family fell into a harmonious rhythm. It was the role of their servant, Louise, to bathe and feed Simone as well as to cook and undertake other household chores. Georges went to work at the courts of appeal each morning, often returning in the evening with Françoise's favorite flowers. They played with their baby before Louise took her to bed, ate dinner together when Louise had returned to serve it, and passed the evening in reading aloud and needlepoint. Georges took it to be his responsibility to provide his wife with the culture befitting her class. Fran Foix took it to be her responsibility to ensure that her learning never exceeded the quantity or kind befitting her sex. 2.5 years after Georges and Fran Foix's marriage, in 1909 they had still not yet received Fran Foix's dowry when her father fled Verdun in disgrace. Gustave Brasser's bank was ordered into liquidation in July 1909, and everything was seized for sale, including the personal possessions of the Brasser family. To add insult to ignominious injury, he was sent to jail, where he spent 13 months before he was tried and condemned to a further 15-month sentence. His former influence still exerted some of its power. However, he was released early. So he moved to Paris, with his wife and youngest daughter, to live near Fran Foix and start over. This turn of events meant that Fran Foix's dowry would never be paid, but at first the family remained harmonious, and hopeful even so. They were happy and their fortune seemed secure. Georges had a reasonable income from his work, and his own inheritance, although modest, had been invested in a way they thought wise. Georges' attention to Fran Foix was tender, and she blossomed into a laughing and lively woman. On the 9th of June 1910 a second daughter was born. She was christened Henriette H.L. Marie, but was called H.L. Nior. Within the family, poupette meaning little doll. Although she was only 2.5 years younger, Simone saw H.L. as a student in need of her expert tutelage. She was already a teacher in the making. The family had hoped for a boy, and Beauvoir detected their disappointment at her birth, writing in her memoirs, with characteristic understatement, that it is perhaps not altogether without significance that her cradle was the center of regretful comment. In H.L.'s own memoirs we read that after the birth announcement her grandparents had written a letter congratulating Georges and Fran Foix on the arrival of a son. They didn't bother to soil new paper when they were informed that it was a girl. They simply added a postscript: I understand that the birth was a little girl, according to the will of God. Beauvoir described her earliest years with a feeling of unalterable security, broken only by the realization that eventually she, too, was condemned to be an outcast of childhood. She loved to be outdoors, exploring nature, relishing in running through lawns and examining leaves and flowers, seed pods and spider webs. Each summer the family spent 2 months in the country, 1 month at George's sister H.L.'s house, a turreted 19th century Ch. Teau called La Grille Ray, and another at his father's estate, Marignac. The Ch. Teau at Marignac was set in a large property of more than 200 hectares, providing ample opportunity for Simone to lose herself in the beauty of nature. Her wonder at natural spaces would be a permanent feature of her life. She continued to associate the countryside with solitude, freedom, and the highest heights of happiness. But for all its grandeur, much to the surprise of some Parisian visitors, the Ch. Teau had neither electricity nor running water. Their Paris apartment, by contrast, was now plush, sparkling, and overwhelmingly red moquette upholstery, a red Renaissance dining room, curtains of red velvet and red silk. The drawing room walls were mirrored, reflecting the light of a crystal chandelier, and there were silver pose coutillots for resting their table knives. In the city, Fran Foix would say goodnight to her daughter in dresses of tulle and velvet before going back to play the grand piano for their guests. Here solitude and natural spaces were harder to come by. Simone had to settle for that common playground, the Luxembourg Gardens. Simone was a precocious reader, and her family cultivated her curiosity with great care. Her father made an anthology of poetry for her, teaching her how to recite it with expression, while her mother enrolled her in one book subscription service, or library after another. The year of Simone's birth was the year in which French state schools were finally granted permission to prepare girls for the baccalaureate, the exam which allowed access to universities. But a girl of Beauvoir's milieu did not go to a state school. In October 1913, when Beauvoir was 5 years old, it was decided that she would attend a private Catholic school, the Adeline Deser Institute, which she nicknamed Le Cours Deser. Although Beauvoir later recalled jumping for joy at the prospect of going, it was a black mark for a girl of her status to be educated in a school at all. Those who had the means had governesses at home. She only attended 2 days a week, Wednesdays and Saturdays, and the rest of the time her schoolwork was supervised by her mother at home, with her father taking interest in her progress and successes. Elney missed her sister on school days, and their relationship remained very close, partly because of a deep affection and partly because the girls were not allowed to socialize with anyone their mother had not vetted, and their mother did not think many of their peers passed muster. Georges and Fran always doted on their eldest, but did not consider Elney an individual in her own right. Elney knew that her parents were proud of Simone. When Simone came first in her class, she was praised profusely by their mother. When Elney also came first, Fran always credited her success to the fact that she had it easier with an older sister to help her. Elney recognized that, as the second-born girl, I was not really a welcome child. But Simone valorized me, even though she could have crushed me by siding with our parents. And that's why I remained attached to her. She was always nice, always defending me against them. The family had few toys, but the sisters enjoyed playing imaginary games and confiding in each other. At the age of 7, Simone had her first private communion, beginning a practice that she would continue to observe 3 times a week, either with her mother or in the private chapel at the withThe. The same year, she wrote her first surviving story, Les Malheurs de Marguerite, The Misfortunes of Marguerite. It was 100 pages long, written by hand in a little paperback notebook she received from her grandfather Brasseur. Until the age of 8, there was only one other child that Simone thought worthy of her respect: her cousin, Jacques. He was 6 months older than her, but had had a boy's education and a good one. At that she was dazzled by his confidence. One day he made her a stained glass window, inscribed with her name. They decided that they were married in the sight of God, and she called him her fiancé. In hindsight, Elney wrote that if it weren't for their isolation, Simone would not have assigned this childish fiancé so much importance, but for at least a decade she thought she really would marry him. The day Beauvoir entered the first form at the age of 9, she met a second outsider, beyond her immediate family, who was worthy of her respect, someone whose life and death would have a profound effect on her. Elisabeth Lecoin Jaja, as Beauvoir called her, was a bright and vivacious student at the withThe, and after meeting at school the two developed an amicable rivalry. She introduced Simone to a new and delicious dimension of life: friendship. With Elney, Simone had learned what it meant to say we. With Jaja, she first tasted what it meant to miss someone. Elney de Beauvoir described Jaja as highly strung, like a sleek and elegant racehorse ready to bolt out of control, but in Simone's eyes she was a marvel. She played the piano beautifully, wrote elegantly, became womanly without losing her boyish daring, and had the nerve not only to admire Racine as one should, but to hate Corneille as one shouldn't. She had subversive ideas, stuck her tongue out at her mother during a piano recital, and despite such displays of hauteur was greeted by her mother with love and affection. So along with the sweetness of friendship, Beauvoir discovered a bitter aftertaste: comparison. She later realized that it was not a fair contest to compare her own life and her own mother with Jaja's. I felt myself from within, and I saw her from without. By the age of 18, Beauvoir was using this distinction, which would go on to play a significant role in her work, between the duality so often observed between the being that I am within myself and the being seen from the outside. With the benefit of hindsight, Beauvoir recognized that Jaja's mother, Madame Lecoin, as Simone's parents noted the day they started to encourage friendship with Jaja, was from a good Catholic family, made a good Catholic marriage, and was a good Catholic mother of 9. She was also wealthy, and secure enough in her status to tolerate Jaja's defiance because she could afford to laugh at convention. The same could not be said for Madame de Beauvoir. If her childhood could be summarized in commandments, the 2 greatest commandments of Simone de Beauvoir's were, "Thou shalt not do what is improper," and "Thou shalt not read what is unsuitable." Françoise de Beauvoir had an unshakably rigid upbringing, with provincial propriety and the morals of a convent girl. Her unwavering faith in God was accompanied by an equally impregnable zeal for etiquette. She never dreamed of protesting in any way against an illogicality sanctioned by social conventions. If this meant that a male friend, living in sin with a woman, could be received in their house, but the woman could not so be it. Fran Boys was, in her daughter's words, apt to confuse sexuality with vice. She mistook desire itself for sin. Since convention allowed men indiscretions, so did she. Women bore the brunt of her dissatisfaction. She was sickened by physical questions, and never discussed them with her daughters. Beauvoir had to learn about the surprises of puberty from her cousin Madeleine. Madeleine was older than Simone, and knew more about bodies and the improperuses of them. One summer day in the country, she told Simone and Hlne about the changes their bodies would soon undergo, that there would be blood and bandages. She offered definitions for mysterious terms: lover, mistress, arousing curiosity about the causal chain preceding childbirth. Emboldened by new knowledge, when the sisters returned to Paris and their mother, Hlne asked Madame de Beauvoir where babies came out. She said they came out of the anus, painlessly. In this and other instances, Fran always misled her daughters about their own body's possibilities in shocking ways. Beauvoir would grow to view her body as vulgar and offensive. Minds, on the other hand, Fran always did not neglect. She even learned English and Latin in order to better help her children. Georges and Fran always both placed a high value on education. A well-bred girl was a well-read one, but they were less than unified about religion. Her mother was as devoutly Catholic as her father was dogmatically atheist. This polarity was to have a profound impact on Beauvoir. Her father provided her with book after book, carefully curated selections from the great works of literature. Her mother provided her with religious literature and a living model of self-sacrificial Catholic devotion. She attended her daughter's classes, which the Cours des Sœurs allowed mothers to do until the girls were 10, and regularly took them to Mass at Notre Dame des Champs or St. Sulpice. By her mid-teens, both the education and the Catholicism would prove to be sources of tension between Beauvoir and her parents. She later described her childhood as suspended between skepticism and faith, and credited this imbalance with making her life a kind of endless disputation. It was, she thought, the main reason she became an intellectual. When the First World War was declared in August of 1914, Georges and Fran always feared occupation, and the family stayed at La Grille until they could determine whether it was safe to return to Paris. There Simone remembered canning and knitting for the war effort as the only time in my life I did those sorts of feminine occupations with any pleasure. The previous year, Georges had been discharged from the army with a weak heart. But he was called to active service even so, and was at the front by October. Within weeks he had a heart attack, so was again discharged from active duty and sent to a military hospital to recover. When he left the hospital for Paris in early 1915, he reassumed duty in the Ministry of War. Paris was beset by inflation, his income was minuscule, and his investments were paying hastily diminishing returns. His expenditure, however, did not adapt accordingly. During these years Simone's beautiful girlhood moved into awkward adolescence. While Hlne's healthy, doll-like features made her epithet poupette increasingly apt, Beauvoir ate little, looked sickly, and was diagnosed with scoliosis. The strictness of her mother's moral code, the tightening of the family finances, and the rules of Paris under blackout provided her increasingly compulsive tendencies with other avenues for gaining her parents' approval. She was becoming a dutiful daughter, but then her universe began to totter.